Welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I'm your host Demo, and I am finishing off my Kaldheim review. You know, I talked about all of the commanders already. I did a video just about the lands, just because I thought there was a lot of lands that were significant in the format. So I did a video just about them. And I decided for the remaining cards, I would just do two videos. I do the top 20 cards from Kaldheim for the EDH format, essentially. And then I'm going to do another one about the top 10 cards that I think people should basically be aware of or maybe not play. So starting out my top 20 list, this is not really in any particular order, so just take that into account. So starting out, number 20, Stoic Farmer. This, I really like how they did this. So this is Core Cartographer, essentially, right? So Core Cartographer always gets you a land. You know, I put Knight of the White Orchard in a lot of my white decks, and I might stop doing that because there's a lot of times when I have Knight out of the White Orchard in my hand, I'll draw it and no opponents have more lands than me, so it does nothing, and I really don't like that. So I like this because you get the card no matter what, and then if it has that, you know, typical mono white clause of if an opponent has more lands, you can put it on the battlefield tapped, but if no one has more lands than you, you still at least get to put it in your hand. You know, and the fact that you can foretell it also, you know, that's relevant because early in the game, you know, you can cast it for, you can foretell it for 2 and then cast it for 2, right? So you can get it out a little bit quicker. So I like that card a lot. That's the kind of stuff that I think that white needs. Cosmic Intervention. So this is, you know, this is basically Eerie Interlude, sort of. You know, maybe Faith's Reward is a better example. But what I really like about this is I like the foretell. So foretell for me is really good when it's an effect like this, when you can just stick this card in exile and it's just going to sit there until, you know, something happens and you need it. So, you know, all the creatures and stuff with foretell, it's just, you're just basically getting it for a little bit cheaper usually. The foretell isn't really significant. I like the foretell when it's an effect like this where, oh, someone just board wiped, I can foretell, right? I have it already stuck in exile, and all I need is 2 mana to get the effect, so I really like that a lot. Rise of the Dreadmarn, another one, exact same scenario. You know, I'm going to stick it in exile, and it's just going to sit there, and I'm going to build up my army, and then when opponent board wipes, all I need is have 1 black mana open, and I get, you know, I get something for, you know, I don't just get completely screwed. I like that a lot. You know, I like these foretell cards as an instant so that you can react to something that your opponent has done. And I also like the fact that they are face down. I didn't realize that at first. I was like, oh man, they're going to see what's happening. You know, they're going to know you have it, so it's not that good. Like Poison the Cup, right? Poison the Cup is another one. Destroy target creature. If this spell was foretold scry 2, that's great. You know, destroying a creature just straight up for 3 mana is okay in Commander. You know, Hero's Downfall would be just straight up better than that because you hit Planeswalkers. But there is really no reason not to foretell this card. If it's early in the game, you pay the 2, you stick it in exile, right? And again, it just sits there and your opponent can't see it. It's face down. They don't know what it is, right? It's like a morph card. And then at any point, you know, someone's attacking you with their giant creature, you just pay 2 mana, so now it's only 2, and you get to scry 2. That's really good. This is, you know, I'm almost thinking, I have Hero's Downfall in a few decks, and I'm thinking I might replace it, because I really like this. And I like that they don't see it coming, because it's face down. Speaking of seeing it coming, the foretell Counterspell saw it coming. Again, I really think that this is very playable, and even might even replace some cards. You know, I talked about, if you watched my overrated cards video, one of them is Arcane Denial, which you know, everyone plays that, and I don't know why. Letting your opponents draw 2 cards is so bad. Just think about the scenario. You draw this off the top. Let's say it's turn 5 or 6, right? You're playing a control deck probably, or something, some variant of. Just pay 2 mana and stick it in exile. Your opponents don't know what it is. They have no idea. And then you have the 2 mana up. You're going to be leaving mana up anyway, probably, if you're playing that kind of a deck. So now you're just leaving up mana, you know, Arcane Denial mana. And this is just straight up better because it's not letting your opponents draw cards. Negate, I put in a lot of my blue decks. I think I'll probably replace Negate with this. I really think I will. I think it's just straight up better. Spectral Deluge, another foretell card. This is just way too good not to. You know, I just made my Cosima deck tech, and this is going in there for sure. I talked about how I put Scourge of Fleets in there because blue is not great at dealing with creatures. You know, even a Simic deck is not great at dealing with creatures. I also did my Coma deck tech, and you know, same thing. Green and blue aren't great with dealing with creatures, actually. And so, you know, they don't have any board wipes. There is none. There's none. You know, there's Cyclonic Rift, there's bounce stuff, but there's no board wipes in blue and green, right? So this is great. You know, it's basically Scourge of Fleets as a spell, and the fact that you can foretell it, and then the next turn you only pay 3 rather than Scourge of Fleets, which costs 7. So good. Definitely going in a couple of my decks. Pact of the Serpent. So choose a creature type. Target player draws X cards and loses X life, where X is the number of creatures they control the chosen type. So the funny thing about this is you can just kill your opponent with it. I like that. I like that it has that option. You're rarely ever going to do that, but if your opponent plays Avenger of Zendikar and has like 30 plant tokens, and then you choose plant and aim it at your opponent, you can make them draw 30 cards and lose 30 life. That's kind of funny. Also, this is a great card in a Nekusar deck, I think, for that reason, because you can make your opponent draw like 8 cards and lose 8 life, and then they'll lose 8 more life when they draw the cards, right? Or even more than that. I think this is a great card in that deck. But more to the point, this is just a great card. I guess I picked a good time to make it a mono black elves deck. Eradicator Valkyrie. This guy is just great. I mean, flying lifelink, 4/3, hexproof from Planeswalkers, which is okay, I guess. I mean, why not? It's better than nothing. You can't be turned into an elk, right? Screw you, Oko. The boast ability is fantastic. Every time it attacks, you can sacrifice a creature. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. That's fantastic. I mean, you can only use it once each turn, but so what? It is a Grave Pact type effect on a creature. Auto include in any Aristocrats deck. There's a couple of decks of mine that I could put this in. It's really good, really versatile. A lot of things you can do with it. I mean, to be quite honest, you could put this in any deck, any black deck you could put this in, because it can sacrifice itself, right? You can sacrifice Eradicator Valkyrie to its own ability and just you do a one-shot Grave Pact. So it's really a great card. Ethereal Valkyrie. So a 4/4 flyer for 6. When Ethereal Valkyrie enters the battlefield or attacks, draw a card. Then exile a card from your hand face down. It becomes foretold. Its foretell cost is its mana cost reduced by 2. So when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you draw a card. So that's good. Right out of the gate, that's good. Then you exile a card from your hand face down. It becomes foretold. So basically what you're going to do is this comes into play. You look at your hand and go, okay, pick something expensive, right? Because you get to pick. That's what makes this so good. You look at your hand and you go, okay, what's something expensive in my hand that I don't want to cast right now, right? Something I'll cast in a later turn, and you just stick that in exile. You foretell it. That's fantastic. By the way, the other thing I like about this foretell, I was just talking about how I hate wheels because they make you discard everything. This is protecting cards from having to get wheeled away. So I like this card a lot. So talking about those foretell costs, Dream Devourer, let's just think about this for a sec. Each non-land card in your hand without foretell has foretell. Its foretell cost is equal to its mana cost reduced by 2, right? And the second ability, whenever you foretell a card, Dream Devourer gets, that's really doesn't, who cares, right? This only costs 2 mana. This is almost like Joyra a little bit. This is sort of Joyra-esque, where you can just put this in any deck and it's just going to make all your spells cheaper, right? So you put this in a deck and you play it on turn 2, and then you just look at your hand. Again, just like with the Ethereal Valkyrie, you're just looking at your hand and you're going, okay, I got some really expensive stuff here that I'm not going to be casting for a while, or I have a board wipe. Even I have a Damnation in my hand. I don't want a board wipe right now. I probably won't want a board wipe for a while, and I will foretell and put it in exile and save it for later, and it's only going to cost me 2 black mana to cast later on. This just seems so good to me. This really, I just think you could put this in any deck because it's just going to make everything cheaper. You can't cast it right away, but then why would you foretell it if you wanted to cast it right away, right? Anything you want to cast later. You got your Runescar Demon. I can't cast it right now because I only have 3 mana, so I'm going to foretell it, and now I can cast it for 5 mana later on instead of 7. I mean, this just seems like an auto-include in a lot of decks. Search for Glory. So search your library for snow, permanent card, legendary card, or second card reveal and put in your hand. Then you gain a life for each snow mana. So if we just get rid of the snow, if you ignore the snow part, you can search your, this is 3 mana to search your library for a legendary card or a saga card. So this goes in a lot of decks. You can get a planeswalker with this, right? You can get an artifact, a legendary artifact. Doesn't have to be a creature. So this is really, even without the snow part, I think this is really good and is going to get played a lot in the format. Glorious Protector. This card is just great. This is basically an area interlude on a creature. You're going to cast it. You're going to exile. Basically, you can save your creatures from a board wipe, right? So it comes in, you exile all your creatures, then the Glorious Protector dies, and all the creatures come back into play. So that's one way you can use it. Again, I like that it has flash, so essentially it's an instant, and it has foretell. I like that. I like that I can just stick this in exile, and then on a later turn, right? So that whole later turn thing doesn't matter, because with flash, this is why I like foretell so much with flash, with instants, because the later turn can just be your next opponent's turn, right? So that part doesn't matter. You're not going to cast it on your turn anyway. So this card, very versatile. I like it a lot. Again, I'm going to try. There's so many cards here I want to put in decks, and I just don't know if I have room. Commander Legends just came out a couple months ago. Like there's so much. I just talked about this in my Orvar spoiler video, which essentially became a what's happening to the format video. So you should go check it out. I sort of go on a rant about how the format is just, it's just too many cards and it's too much all at once. And clearly these standard sets are so engineered towards Commander that it's just, the format's changing so fast and there's just so many cards we can't play them all. It's just too much. Slow down. Mystic Reflection. I really like this card. Again, it's got foretell. It's an instant, so we stick it in there and we just have that 1 blue mana up, just waiting for when we want to set this off. Great. Again, like this is getting exhausting because there's so many cards now that I want to put this in all my blue decks. I just don't know if I have room. I just don't know if I can. What am I going to take out, right? Because this is a card, I talked about this with my Akasima deck tech. I put Release to the Wind in there, and I love that card. It is so versatile, all the things you can do with it. This card is the same. There's just a lot you can do with it. Right away, I know people are thinking up busted combos you can do with your own cards. Like I heard someone say, you Avenger of Zendikar, and then in response to the plant tokens, you cast this, and all of the plant tokens come in as copies of Avenger of Zendikar, and so you get a zillion, like, yeah, that's crazy, and it busted, and sure. I like this card because of what you can do to your opponents. That's what I like about it. I like that you can have it sitting in exile, and someone goes, I cast my Vorinclex, or I cast my Elishnorn, and you go, that's going to come into play as a copy of my, Mana Dork or something, right? You're not going to get a Vorinclex. You can have Alana War Elves, right? I think that's for me what makes this card super, super good is you can just turn you really can hose a lot of people. Like even someone casts their commander, and you just go, you're not getting your commander. Actually, you're going to get a copy of someone else's creature, whatever the worst creature on the board is, an Eldrazi spawn token. That's what you get. Great card. It just can go in so many decks that I just don't know what to put it in. Raven Form. Man, blue has really been getting some great cards lately, especially with the exile. They've really been getting a lot of these exile effects. They just got that Amphin Mutineer, right? That does this. So exile target artifact or creature. Its controller gets a. So now blue gets to exile artifacts. This is sort of like Feed the Swarm, right? Feed the Swarm is just an auto-include in every black deck now. Every mono black deck, every Rakdos deck. Obviously, if you have white, there's no need for it. Same with Raven Form, right? If I'm playing a white-blue deck, I'm not playing this card. If I'm playing a Dimir deck, this is going in my Dimir decks. This is going in my mono blue deck. Probably going in my Simic decks as well. I don't know. I don't know if I put this in my Simic decks just because green is so good at dealing with artifacts. But definitely it's going in my Dimir decks because Dimir can't deal with artifacts. I have a Rona deck, and I used to hate the fact that I couldn't deal with artifacts or enchantments. So now I can deal with enchantments. Thank you, Feed the Swarm. And now I can deal with artifacts too. Thank you, Raven Form. So Broken Wings. So this is, so destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. I used to put Crushing Canopy in some decks. I think Crushing Vines is the other one I want to say. This is basically a combination of both of them. You know, I really like the versatility. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. That's always going to be an option. Or you can also destroy a creature with flying. So Krosan Grip was another card that I talked about in my overrated cards. I really like it. The chances that you're going to be using that split second are rare. I put Krosan Grip in my CEDH decks just because there's so many counter spells and Krosan Grip can't be countered. But in most decks, I would replace Krosan Grip with this, with Broken Wings, because, you know, the option of I can destroy your big flying creature, just, man, that's good. And again, green doesn't kill creatures very well, so I just think this is a card that should not be overlooked. Masked Vandal. This one's just great. I mean, so forget the Changeling for a second. When Masked Vandal enters the battlefield, you may exile a creature card from your graveyard. Okay, if you do, exile target artifact and enchantment. So this is a card for 2 mana that exiles an artifact or an enchantment. That's fantastic. You have to exile a creature card from your graveyard. Okay, so in any creature-heavy deck, that should not be an issue. This is an ETB, so, you know, is this just straight up better than a Rex Sage? I don't know. It's close. You know, the fact this has Changeling means you can put it in any tribal deck. So it goes in any tribal deck. Tribal decks are going to have lots of creatures anyway. Man, this is just an auto-include in so many decks. This goes in every green tribal deck, I think. Okay, even an Elf's deck, I would put this in. The fact that you can exile an artifact or enchantment in green doesn't really do that. So good. Again, another card that I'm going to have to try to fit into at least 3 or 4 decks. Ugh. In Search of Greatness. So this card, when I first saw it, I was like, oh no. Like, I was like, this is brutal. Like, what are they doing? Why? This is so busted. But then I was like, okay, calm down. Maybe it's not as good as you think it is. Okay, so you have to play it. So you play it, then you got to wait till your next upkeep to use it. You cast a permanent spell from your hand with a converted mana cost equal to 1 plus the highest converted mana cost among other permanents you control. So, first of all, it doesn't include In Search for Greatness. So In Search for Greatness doesn't see itself. So if you play this on turn 2 and you have nothing else, on turn 3, you can cast a 1-drop. That's it. You can't cast a 3-drop. I mean, this is more restricting than I originally thought it was. You have to have that CMC in your hand or this does nothing, right? I mean, you get to scry 1. Okay, great, whatever. They just had to throw that in there because this card isn't good enough already. I just don't think this is a card that you're going to use early in the game. This is a card to me that works better, greater in the game. You know, I talked about this with my Amareth deck. It absolutely goes in my Amareth deck because you're filling your hand with creatures a lot, and this gives you an opportunity to cheat them into play without having to cast them. I put Hunting Grounds in that deck for that reason. Hunting Grounds is similar-ish to this card, where if you, and that's another card that should get played a lot more. If you're filling your hand with creatures, that's a great way to get them onto the battlefield. Sisay. Oh man, is this good in a Sisay deck, right? Because you are tutoring. You're just going to grab a creature out of your hand. This is so good in a Sisay deck because the upkeep trigger hits the stack, right? In response, you look at your battlefield and you say, okay, well, what's in play that, you know, I go get whatever that CMC is that is on the stack. I go get that out of my deck and I put it directly into play. So good in that deck. It's so good in a few decks. I just don't think it is. I mean, it's a great value card. Again, I'm going to put it in my Amareth deck for sure. Any Birthing Pod style deck. Again, I talked about this with Hibernation's End. Hibernation's End, Birthing Pod, a lot of these cards, if you're climbing up the CMC ladder and you have a really good distribution, cards like that are really, this is going to be great in a deck like that, in any kind of Birthing Pod deck. You know, I just don't think, people are going, oh, well, I'm going to cheat an Eldrazi into play with this. I just don't think, if that's what you're doing, I don't think that's actually a good idea. I really don't. you know, if you're playing a mono green deck, maybe an Azusa deck that has lots of Eldrazi, and then you can put your 9-drop Eldrazi, you know, in play, and then the next turn you can cheat your Ulamog into play, I guess. I don't know. I just don't. I don't think that's the great way to go. In an Azusa deck, you're going to be having tons. You're just going to be hard casting them, so it doesn't really matter. So I just don't think that's the route to go with this, which is why I don't think it is as busted as I originally thought. I actually think this card is a lot more fair than I originally thought, just because it is fairly restricting. Moving on, Cosmos Elixir. Again, this is if you're playing a life gain deck, auto include. My Patron of Kitsune deck, it's going in there for sure. You know, if your life total is lower for whatever reason, because you've been getting attacked a lot, or you play this later in the game, so what? You're still getting the life trigger, right? And a lot of in a life gain deck, you want that gain life trigger because you have lots of cards that are going to trigger, like, you know, Dawn of Hope, that's going to trigger off of that life gain. So now you get that trigger, and you're going to draw a card anyway, right? So just super fantastic. Auto include in any life gain deck. And you could even play this in, you know, a deck that's not gaining life, because it's just going to sit there and gain you life every turn, and then eventually it's going to draw you cards. So if you're in a deck, if you're in a mono white deck, maybe you put this in there anyway. I was going to do a video just on the Sagas. I was going to do a separate video just on Sagas because there's so many in this set, and I decided against it. And the reason I decided against it is because I started looking at them, and most of the Sagas are very specific. Okay, they're tribal, most of them, like Battle of Frost and Fire. It's for a giant, right? So there's nothing to talk about here. If you're playing a red-blue giant deck, then you're going to put that in there. There's nothing to say, right? Firja's Retribution, right? If you're playing a black-white Angels deck, you're going to play this card. And if you're not, then you're not going to play it, right? There's nothing to talk about. And most of the Sagas are like that. Most of the Sagas in this set, you know, they're doing very specific things that you're going to want to put them in those very specific decks. So there's really nothing to say. So I just picked out a couple that I thought are more well-rounded that you could put in any deck. Shodan of the Scalds is one of those. This can go in any Boros deck, right? Exile top 4 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play those cards. So this is essentially, you know, you can play lands with this. So this is essentially draw 4 cards, right? This is draw 4 cards for 4 mana. Pretty good. In Boros, that's pretty damn good, because you get 2 turns to play all this stuff, right? And then the other, you know, the 2 and the 3, whenever you cast a spell this turn, put a +1 counter. Again, that's just good, right? Those are just good abilities that you could just put in any deck. You could just put this in any Boros deck, I think, and it would be good. Probably be great in a Belborca deck if you have a Belborca deck. I don't know if anyone out there has a Belborca deck. I don't know if anyone does, but that definitely, I think, an auto include in that deck. And Binding of the Old Gods. 4 mana, destroy target non-land permanent opponent controls. So Golgari is just getting more cards that just destroy permanents. It just has so many already. What's interesting is when I first saw this, destroy target non-land permanent opponent controls, I was going to be like, oh, well, that's just like, and I blanked because there actually isn't a card that does that. There is Maelstrom Pulse, which destroys each one with the same name. So that's similar. Assassin's Trophy can hit lands. There isn't a lot of cards that, there is no card that does exactly that, which is kind of surprising. That I know of. Maybe I'm blanking here. I can't think of one. So I have Status and Statue in a couple of my decks just because I'm a big fan of removal, man. So I go deep. You can use both sides, but essentially that card, you destroy an artifact, creature, and enchantment. This is just straight up better than that. So I'm probably going to just with the first ability, this is just straight up better than that. So I'm probably going to replace that card with this one in those decks. And then the second, search your library for force card, put another battle. Like, who doesn't want to do that, right? Everybody wants to do that. And then the third one, creatures you control gain death touch until end of turn. The third ability is actually probably the least impressive one. The first 2 are great. Destroy a non-land permanent and then go get a forest and put it into play. Fantastic. That is it. That's all. That is the top 20 cards that I think people should be putting in their commander decks from the Kaldheim set. Thanks for tuning in.